Hello! Welcome to the very, 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 very last day that we will be talking about WandaVision Fridays. It's Which Business Day? The last of it, The Last of Us. Different topic. Eric Goldman is here joining me, Roth Cornet, to talk about this with, ladies and gentlemen, 110% spoilers. So if you have not seen the episode, this is it, the final episode. Go out now. Make sure to sit through the credits, I will say.
Yes.
Come back and join us and talk about your thoughts then. 5, 4, 3, 2, explosion spoilers. Eric, this is it. We've been waiting for this. We've been loving this season. We've been talking about it every week. Are you satisfied with the conclusion of this series?
Well, that specific question, then yes, I am satisfied with the conclusion of the series. The finale itself, I thought, was decent. I thought there had been several episodes that I love the show. And I think there are other episodes that I just loved. I didn't love this unequivocally. There are parts of it I loved, but it was not my favorite episode. And there's some things I wish they'd handled differently. And there's some things I thought they handled very well and very poignantly. So a mixed bag of a finale, though I do think where they landed on certain emotional beats, I did like quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've talked about with some frequency and very clearly the emotional arc of this show is about grief and letting go, and certainly that is what happened. The MCU arc of this show is about her becoming the Scarlet Witch officially. Those I agree with you in terms of how the series was concluded, and it does feel like a complete series to me now. I think I had tweeted the other day that I was sad that it was going away, and perhaps there was a season 2 about rebooting television shows that could get pretty meta and fun. But now it doesn't feel necessary to me now that I've seen the conclusion. But I agree with you in terms of the actual episode. The finale itself, there were some things that I didn't love. And so we'll start with probably the most obvious one and the thing that likely fans are talking about, which was the resolution to Peter, which fell very flat for me.
We should say never called Peter Pietro.
He was called Pietro, but we know him as Peter. Evan Peters playing Quicksilver as Peter, not Pietro. So I will say, and I have to even just put my hair up, I'm that upset. I really didn't like it. It was the exact thing that I hoped they weren't going to do, which was 100% a fan fake out. And let me list the following reasons why I don't like it. I'm just not a fan of faking out your fans, period. I'm just not a fan of like teasing them multiple times with something that we know that event inevitably will and must happen because of the deal between these studios. I am not a fan of creating a circumstance in which that actually might have made sense and open the door to the multiverse, tease the idea of the multiverse, and then pull back from it. I am not a fan of the idea that this guy that happens to look exactly like Peter in this dimension lives exactly in the house that's next door to the exact house that Wanda lives in this created universe, and that Agnes chooses to move into, and that she's not only able to take control of him with her magic necklace, and how is that interfering or interacting with the spell Wanda's already casting? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then on top of it, she's able to imbue him with the powers of Quicksilver, and he can handle them as this regular seemingly actor. First of all, this actor dude who can just suddenly, why was he an actor and have a headshot other than we just needed to know his name, but fine.
And they could have a real old Evan Peters headshot.
And they could have an old Evan Peters headshot. And then suddenly like he wouldn't kill himself by running through a wall the minute he had those powers. Why would he know how to handle them? So those are all of the logical flaws and gaps that I find there. And I just think it's way too much, which sounds ironic given the nature of this show, too much suspension of disbelief to this set of circumstances all occurring and working.
Yeah, it just, I mean, look, I'll play devil's advocate. People can make jokes about that phrase, I guess. But with the fact that, okay, well, he doesn't just happen to live next door. If they never acknowledge the X-Men universe in the MCU ever, though we keep thinking that they will at some point, especially with Deadpool coming. But
Eric, they will.
They will. And that's the thing is like, it's too much. It's too, it's funny because, people were like saying to me, oh no, it's just an in joke. And I'm like, and I think you and I both thought it's the one one thing that would like really annoy us if it was just an in-joke. And like you said, the thing about him having powers is funny because Monica says to him at some point, she says like, how is she doing this? Or how is she controlling you? But it's never raised, how can you run really fast?
Yeah.
that question is never raised. So it's just super strange that it's just like, oh, I guess we're supposed to assume. Now I understand by them not saying anything, it does leave the door open for them to say something else later, right? But it just seems very again, I never wanted this show at the end. I never thought this show would end with him being like, my name is Peter Maximoff. I'm from another universe from Xavier's school, and go into a whole monologue about the X-Men universe.
No.
I just thought he is there to be this stepping stones for something else later, and they don't even have to fully say it at the end.
Explain it.
All he has to say is, I'm from somewhere else, or Agatha can say, I got him from somewhere else.
Yeah.
They had to say. Instead, they were like, it's this guy next door, you know?
Or when she wakes him up, he could just be like, if there was no headshot of this other person, if she wakes him up, he could just be like, how did I get here? You know?
Right. Especially, you know, by the way, weren't they super leading into it, even with his like man cave, which felt very Peter in Days of Future Past, like the way we meet him.
His personality is the same personality.
Yep.
You know, he has so there's a...
Yeah, it was too much. Like, it wasn't just like, hey, this actor from another thing. It was like, I mean, you know, they literally made him, you know, another Quicksilver. And knowing we were going to be wondering this, knowing they have a movie called Multiverse coming, again, it doesn't have to be the definitive word on it. But I will say, in the context of this show, I was just really frustrated that that's the thing they decided to do, especially because it's funny. I know that everyone kind of grabs different things they think are important, or theories, you know, can get out of hand. To me, I never needed to know who Ralph was. It could have just been the trope of like Ralph, the off-screen husband. And I would have been okay. And then it was funny that like, oh, we're going to answer who Ralph is, but in a way that's going to really, frustrate me, Eric Goldman, and some other people too. Yes.
100%. Like, I don't need to know who Ralph is. And I certainly didn't like that answer. If I did want to know who Ralph was. And this is the other thing that I'll say, even if we were to go along with the theory that each multiverse has a doppelganger and this is Peter's doppelganger, and he just happens to be there at the exact perfect time. And he happens to be the doppelganger who I guess could have been a mutant, but isn't, because we don't have them. And that's how we can sustain, like, this is what I mean by it breaks suspension of disbelief. Obviously, I'm watching a show in which people fly in the air and shoot light at each other, you know. But it needs to maintain its own internal logic. It needs to set a standard of its own internal logic and maintain that in order for us to go along. Even more so, the more the height in the universe is, we're less forgiving because we're already giving you a lot, you know, in terms of our suspension of disbelief. So it's even more important that you maintain your own integrity to your created reality. And that's just too much of it's just like there's just too much there that's hamstrung in and not hamstrung in, forced in, shoehorned in. And I just think it really was disappointing as a viewer. I feel condescended to. I don't like it. Wow, I'm really upset. I didn't even know until we started.
I think you're more upset than it certainly bugged the hell out of me, but yeah.
It's the same way I felt about Glenn in The Walking Dead. I stopped watching the show because that's how much it pissed me off.
Right.
So with that in mind, let us talk about some of the other things that occurred this episode. Were you pleased with the resolution around first? Well, thank you, I guess we're going in the direction that our producer wants us to go. And I was going to say Agatha, but let's talk about Vision 2 White Vision.
I was it's Roth. A couple days ago we did an SJU where we did some finale predictions, and at first I said, I don't think either Vision will be around at the end, but then I'm glad I settled on the second one, or said I thought I'd be okay with the second one because it's what they did, which is, well, he could still be around, but they can't be together. The ending of this show could not be, I got Vision back. It couldn't be like, they integrate together and now she's with. They're kind of doing what the comic book did. You know, in the comic books, we mentioned it's like he became this sort of white ghostly Vision who had lost all of his emotion. And this was the funny thing is, this happened like 30 years ago in the comics. They still have never been put back together romantically. Even as he got more of his humanity back, it's like they couldn't reconnect what they once had because he wasn't really the same guy anymore. So it's like by him, like at the end, he's not evil. he kind of he remembers what happened, but then he just kind of takes off. I am okay with that. I understand it gives them an out to if they want to put them back together again, but right now they're not doing that. It's still certainly her going on her own journey, and because I suspected this was a possibility with this version of the Vision, I was good with that, especially because what they did with the Vision that we've been following for this whole show, who turned out to be like the fake Vision, but the one that we were very emotionally invested in for 9 episodes. I thought that was very strong in and of itself. And also how those scenes between the two Visions were great. They've done such a good job since Age of Ultron of giving Paul Bettany this great dialogue, this very thoughtful Vision dialogue, which he delivers so impeccably. And so the interaction between the two of them, their conversation about the boat, and is it ever still the original boat if you replace all the pieces and all that stuff, I thought that stuff was great. And so I am good with the White Vision finale, just because it didn't involve him and Wanda, him being there with Wanda being like, hey, I'm back, we can go off together. She still had to deal with like a goodbye to the Vision that she knew and loved, both the one before this show, but especially the one in this show that she had, created herself, it turned out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in terms of the emotional arc, that was the most satisfying part of this episode. I also loved the conversation about the boat, but I particularly thought it was well done and well crafted, because it was, at the end of the day, it was like neither material thing is the boat. It's the memories that are imbued in the boat. You know what I mean? And those exist outside of those material things, right? So that to me, and that's what the show is about, like memory and loss, and what is grief but love persevering, which means remembering it, and maintaining that continuity. So I thought that was really, really, really beautiful, and in line with what we had seen. And to your point, they now have an out where there is a Vision that can be an Avenger, but a very different kind of Avenger potentially.
Yeah.
The Vision that can go off on his own and do his own thing, and not really adhere to being part of anything. And there's a Vision that eventually maybe ends up back with the Scarlet Witch. But why I don't think that's going to happen immediately is we've been set up to understand that she's specifically more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, which I also thought was like, oh, that's the thing you're going to specifically point out. But okay, good. I mean, it is an important thing for us to know.
Yes.
In the ongoing, and that she's destined to destroy the world, which obviously they're going to play with this idea that is she or isn't she actually, and we won't know probably going into that next movie, or she's just coming in as a straight up villain. And the only thing that would bring her back from that is her relationship with Vision, which is no longer available to her. She's lost. Also, the kids, I will ask, I thought that she, that what she had to sacrifice and that no one will know or care, was poignant, because that's a very lonely feeling.
Yeah.
To be doing things for other people and have them believe otherwise. And so I thought that even feeds in, it almost escalates the loneliness that you've done.
No.
You've actually have done the right thing.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really well done. I mean, I teared up a couple times in this episode, and certainly, the stuff with the Vision and hers goodbye, and then like just the idea that she had to sacrifice this. I really liked her exchange with Monica, where Monica's like, well, they don't know what you sacrificed, and she's like, even if they did, it wouldn't matter because she did something terrible to them. It's
she
like,
did.
And she realizes that, and that even though she can say like, I lost all this stuff, she still like kind of screwed with these people probably for life, from the manipulation she inadvertently, but then kind of went along with after the fact, it did to them.
Yeah. So, and I also want to talk about Eric, the kids, because that had been my question, which was like, she is physical and they came out of her. So are they allowed to be physical in a way that Vision isn't? And I guess the answer is dad had the dominant genes in this particular case, and they are not physical at all. But she does have kids. In the comic universe, so I was surprised to some degree to see them just go away.
Well, not to get too into the weeds of the comics, but
let's get in the weeds.
It in the comics, something similar happened as far as like they were not real. They were gone, and then
but they came back.
They came back, and of course, did you watch both the post-credit scenes, Roth?
I did.
Okay. So, it's like we hear that voice at the end. It's like, which again, it's interesting in that we thought we know this show leads into Doctor Strange 2. We thought it might more directly sort of set up Doctor Strange 2 as far as like the multiverse is broken or something. It didn't, but it certainly gave you lots of, first of all, you're stronger than the Sorcerer Supreme, but also at the end when she's hearing that voice, it's like, well, where's she hearing that voice from? You know, is that the multiverse? Like, what exactly is happening there at the end that she's hearing? I think it's only one of the kids' voice, but still, she's hearing at least one of her, if not both kids. So I feel like, yeah, it's like it's saying that something's going on there, and setting up like what might happen if she's trying to like get to those kids, or believes that they are somewhere out there, whether or not she's, you know, is this true or not? We don't know. But again, it seems unavoidable that they'll bring the kids back, because the kids has older teenagers are part of the Young Avengers, and they seem to be so setting up that concept of all the teen characters they're bringing in, that it feels like, you know, that's like, you know, you feel like they're going to cast two guys to stand there alongside Haley Steinfeld and the girl playing Miss Marvel, and about, you know, a bunch of these people that they're casting at some point.
Yeah, that feels right to me. I mean, so let me I do think, like, just in terms of the emotional arc, that was the right thing to do. And then it's obviously teasing all is not as we perhaps is not as wrapped up as we think. And they also left the door open to Agnes returning, like, yeah, if I need you, I know where to find you. Which means for Marvel writers, like, well, if you need her, we've put her on ice and we can pull that character back if we think it's useful to us. So what did you think about her resolution?
Oh, I liked the resolution. When I watched the episode a second time, and it helped me a little with one thing, because I was like, well, at the end, you know, if the town is all back to normal, won't they be like, who's this woman? But she has a line of dialogue that can kind of magic that away, which is she says to Agatha, no one will ever bother you. So it almost sounds like it's like she's made her into Agnes, the nosy neighbor, and in a way that it's like, she'll just live her life and other things won't intrude on that, because that's part of the spell that that Wanda has cast. I also really liked, by the way, as far as the like the fact that she tricked her with the runes. When I watched it again, I was like, okay, I see what's happening here, because she's getting weak. Wanda looks to be getting weaker and weaker. So she's hitting her, but she's also missing her a lot. And you're like, oh, that's when she's creating the runes. Like every time she's missing her and it's hitting the barrier, she's purposely missing her, but making it seem like it's the fact that she's weak and not doing great. So I actually thought on the second time watching that worked better for me as a reveal, because I could see that they were setting it up. We talked about, like, was there more to Agatha as far as like villain goes? Not really, because what it turns out she really wanted to was that she was a sort of succubus, a sort of power collector. And because
like the yogurt thing, the yogurt commercial.
The yogurt, that's right. She physically takes, from others. You can't, she doesn't want to I said, is she like a Sith? And she wants this other one. She doesn't want the other one. She just wants her power, and she wants her to get more powerful in order to steal more power.
Yeah, and that's what we had talked about, the analogy of like Hansel and Gretel and fattening up the kids, and the idea was like fattening up her magic in order to steal it. That someone was trying to do that, and in this case, it was Agatha Agnes, and what I will say though, what she said that was interesting to me, and I couldn't tell if this was just her psychological rationalization or if there was something real here, where she says, I take it from people that aren't worthy. Now, I couldn't tell if there is some level of unworthiness, meaning the person even doesn't totally believe they're worthy of their own power, and so it opens a door for her to take it. Like she felt guilty, Wanda felt guilty. Or if it was like, you're not worthy because you're too weak and I'm strong, haha. My only disappointment with how it played out, because I do think you're right, the fight itself was very clever, was that she just ended up being fairly arch. There just was like fairly two-dimensional arch villain, which isn't a bad thing. She was delightful and fun to watch, and I loved the Wicked Witch of the West moment with her shoes under the car. That was great.
And Catherine Hahn it was so great when she was changed back into Agnes, because it really showed you like the difference that she can make that switch when she's just like back to being like, perky Agnes.
Duckly.
Yeah. Flandersing.
She's fully Flandersing. It was like full on Flanders. Yeah, that's my only disappointment there, is like, well, what they would have to find a way to use her again that would elevate that, which I certainly have faith that Marvel can do if they should want to.
I think again, because as we talked about, it's like they changed her so much from the comics where she was a mentor figure, but having that line of dialogue, because Agatha's like, well, you'll need me, and she's like, well, I know where to find you if you do. It does insinuate that there might be something that Wanda needs to learn from her, and she could become a mentor in a you know, a Hannibal Lecter, I know you're my villain, but I need information from you way, you know? So that seemed to me like what they were doing is like, oh, she's still out there to be some sort of mentor, but just their dynamic going into this is so different because they never had a teacher-student relationship, you know?
No, they didn't. And by the way, if anybody was just wondering, I just did my fava beans. That's what that was. If you caught that and you were like, is she having a seizure?
I thought she was just, I think you're being thoughtful in like a very specific way.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting about that too is she just hands her, this was a little bit of like, you know, an act 3 villain exposition, like I'm handing you this magical device for no good reason for me. Like I have no motivation to hand you this book, but I'm going to do it anyway. But she hands her this book, and now she's got access to it, and it looks to me like she can't handle it, you know? Like she's sitting there trying to take in all the information and learn what it means to be the Scarlet Witch and all of that, but it's like she doesn't have the proper training. So it's kind of like, if you know, any given Jedi trying to train on their own, like not a good idea. Yeah. So she needs someone, and that's the only someone she knows.
Right. I mean, of course she does. I guess she never had a conversation with him, but she and Doctor Strange fought Thanos together. Right. And we know that she's going to end up with him one way or the other. We don't exactly know what the dynamic will be. So it feels like maybe that's who she's going to seek out, you know? It just feels like the road might lead back to Agatha. We should address the book that they did say that it's the Darkhold, which is, you know, in the comics, a big sort of dark magic book, but that very notably the Darkhold had been on both Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Runaways before, but it looked totally different. And I think that's one of those things everyone kind of just has to accept because different people made that show and that movie. So if you want to say it's the same book, but it looks different, that's magic for you. Because the real explanation is that Kevin Feige and his team were like, we want to design it from the ground up ourselves. And
that is the real explanation. Yes. The real explanation is it was a different department.
Yes.
Department.
right. But that was, and then like that prophecy that you're, you know, destroy the world. It's one of those things that seems right for like misinterpret, you know, it can be interpreted a different way. Destroy, again, if we're thinking that something's gonna happen with the multiverse, like does destroy the world mean bring the barriers down or rewrite the world versus like I will kill all life, you know? I think that it might be one of those things where there might be a different version of what that means.
You and know, I also think there's a D, there's an all of the above, Eric.
There is a D, that's true. I was glad. I mean, again, I'm not saying that like there's no room or no way I'd accept, you know, Wanda has a quote unquote villain, but yeah, the way this show had been structured, it did not feel right if this show was going to end with like, I'm the Scarlet Witch and I'm here to destroy. Like this show needed to deal like, and that's where, you know, again, because while I didn't like love the finale unequivocally, I thought it did what it needed to as far as being true to its story about this woman accepting her losses and moving on. Now moving on to, we don't know, things could get really crazy for her after this. But I didn't want her in this story to suddenly like go dark. And so I was glad they didn't do that. And by the way, my other big emotional moment was when she becomes the Scarlet Witch and the costume comes on and the theme, which is, you know, Christopher Beck's closing credit theme, which is called Wanda's theme. If you'd looked, was like kind of becomes this like booming emotional version of it. I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, I thought that was very well done too. It was very satisfying. It had been earned, like we said, where I also really liked the idea coming back to, I'm going to go back to something we were talking about last week a little bit in terms of just the metaphor of an initiation, right? And so that the idea of an initiation is that the power is earned through pain. And that's exactly what happened here. And they baked it in that the Scarlet Witch isn't born, she's made. And she's made through these trials, and she's made through this pain, and she's made through this trauma. And when she has clearly, like, you can tell that she's already made the decision that she's going to sacrifice this imagined family that she's created and deal with one more massive loss in her life. And at that point, perhaps that's when she earns the right to fully emerge and be the Scarlet Witch and own that power. But what I would say on the other side of that coin is, to your point, Eric, like things might get crazy. Like, think about isolation the last year and how, I don't know about you guys, but, you know, my partner was out of town working for a couple of weeks. And in that window, I was like, I think I might be crazy because I've just been alone so much, you know, and like I'm on Zoom calls and she's in the woods with a book and all of this power coursing through her with no one. Like, yeah, she might go a little nuts.
Right. Well, no, and she has a reason to, and it's like, yeah, it's like just because this show sort of showed her kind of realizing what she did here caused damage doesn't mean you can say she never stumbles again in a different way, because yeah, she went through a lot. By the way, I wanted to mention that I really liked that scene where the Agatha wakens up the town. And they're all kind of confronting her, and that Dottie saying like, "Can I have my kid back awake?" And I don't care. What put her in any storyline you want.
Yeah.
And I forget and Mrs. Hart saying like, "Your grief is poisoning us," which is a very big statement on when someone is like lost in grief, how they can unintentionally damage people around them, and this is that taken to a superhuman level. So I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, 100%. And then also it was interesting, I thought, especially to have Dottie be the person that was that vulnerable and just really wanting to hold her child and be like, you can make her the bully, you can have her be bullied. I just want to see her.
Yeah.
When she had been this arch, nasty piece of
Mm-hmm.
work, when we met her previously. Yeah, I thought that was really well done. And then Wanda coming to understand, like, no, I'm making it better for you guys. Like, you certainly are not.
Right.
To your point that when people are in a lot of pain, that there's, and I think they made a really good, this is the only reason I'm coming around on Agnes, and I'll tell you why in this exact moment, Eric. I think they made a really good, though broad point, but that's an important one about intent. And that the damage is the damage either way. So somebody can be acting out of pain and do things that are, whether it's like anything, have a temper,
Right.
snap at people, small things that create damage in the world. Obviously she's doing this at a superhuman level, but they're not doing it because they want to hurt other people. In fact, they don't. But their pain is what's acting for them. And the result is the same, which is that the other people are in pain. And then there's Agnes, who is acting from malice, who is acting from avarice, and ill will, and it's with pure intent. She means to do harm, and she does do harm, but that the result is the same either way. And so when she sits there and has that conversation with Monica, you're absolutely right. And she says, well, it wouldn't matter if they did understand that I was acting from pain because I caused them pain.
Right.
I don't know if that's 100% true. I find that if I've been in a situation, I don't know about you, Eric, but I don't think that's 100% true. I think intent does matter. And if I believe somebody meant to do harm, I'll have a very different response than if I think they didn't.
Right. I think it certainly can be the case. I think
in this case it's a little too extreme.
It's too extreme, and it's also so many people that maybe some might understand, but some wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I think that I think it was a fair statement on Wanda's part, simply because how can you make like thousands of people all understand?
No, you can't. And then also it is a matter of degree as well, because as much as you might understand that a drunk driver was in pain if they killed someone, that result is the same for you.
Right.
Okay, so that got dark. Let us move on to
analogies, people. Analogies.
Analogies. Yeah, I do think that the arc of this series was incredibly well done. It lost the essence of what I think, in a way that many fans will like, but that was sad to me, is that like it very quickly lost the essence of what was so cool and different about it.
Yeah. I mean, because this finale had a lot of people flying and fighting each other, which I'm for people flying and fighting each other. Don't get me wrong, but this show was something different, where I was like, man, I wish there was a way this finale could have had one more TV show sequence.
Me too.
One more. They had the little flickers as it's going away, like we flicker through, but I wanted them to somehow get that back. What this finale reminded me of a bit, and this is not me saying an exact correlation, and it's also not me saying this show is as great as this other show, though I love them both, but it reminded me a bit of Breaking Bad, in that I loved the third to last Breaking Bad with Ozymandias. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So much. Ozymandias, thank you. And to me, that is the culmination and like kind of the dramatic culmination of the show. And the next two episodes, including the finale, are good. But to me, they kind of like told the this is the consequences, and that, or this is what was going to happen in that third to last one. And I kind of feel like that with WandaVision with last week's episode, which is probably my favorite, and emotionally hit me so hard. And I was like, yeah, they're really summing up like everything this show is about. We're so feeling what she's gone through and what caused all this. So this episode had a bit of like, okay, now we need to like end the show, and it had some strong moments in that, but it peaked for me last week, with that, as far as like really kind of nailing the core of what they were telling, what this show was really about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you're also comparing it to one of the most perfect episodes of television.
Right. I'm not saying it's exactly as good as that, mind you. I'm just saying it made me think of that as far as feeling like, hey, that was fine as a finale, and I love the show, but I feel like last week was the one that really like that kind of brought it home for me,
I agree, because last week was the one that had the emotional resonance. It had all the themes, but it also was hitting on like the format, where this show just went, it was 100% right back. It was so Marvel. It was like the marvelous of marvelous.
Right.
I mean, it was, which is fine. It's okay. I love the MCU. I actually really do, but I wished it had retained some core of what was making this stand out so distinctly in that universe by finding a show to layer in over the whole thing. That's a big ask. A big ask.
It is hard, and it's a very typical thing for these superhero stories. It's like, it's why very few people will say their favorite part of Black Panther was when Black Panther and Killmonger fight each other at the end, because there's certain, and not to say like, Avengers Endgame and Infinity War haven't had some amazing final battles, but it's usually not your favorite part. It's not the part where you're like, this is what it's all about. And especially with this show, which was very high concept, but doing something really interesting and weird, there's kind of a bit of like, well, now we have to have a final fight. And it's fine. And I do like the resolution of some of it, especially the fact that it's like the way the two visions kind of have this conversation instead. Yeah. That was cool. But at the same time, it wasn't like what the show what made me love about it was not still in the finale as much, because it had to kind of do the like, okay, final confrontations,
It felt like it had to check some boxes that led into future things, which is always the challenge, I think, for these things where there is a long continuity and a big arc. And so I understand that. And given all of that, I do think it resolved well and was well done and was emotionally resonant. But last week was the one that was the sucker punch. I agree.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring up sucker punch. I apologize. The one thing that I just do, I'm going to call out to Ryan. Ryan, get this chats ready, please. I want to say something that Spencer Gilbert reminds me of frequently, and it's so counterintuitive. It's just so counterintuitive. It drives me nuts. But low concept is the thing that's hard to explain, and high concept is the thing that's very easy to explain in a sentence. So this was actually a low concept show. Isn't that dumb? Language is stupid. Okay, so that's Spencer always reminds me of that when I reverse that.
I hope he says it in a thoughtful Paul Bettany Vision way.
He's pretty condescending, actually. No, I'm just kidding. He's amazing. He's
but perhaps low concept is the highest concept of all.
No, he's awesome. I love Spencer. Let's go to the chat, but first, pause. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel for videos every weekday. Hit that like and that bell for us. The Fandom 5 will be back in 2 weeks on the MCU. You can win real money with your MCU knowledge, so please do sign up for that. There will be a link in the description below, and we will be coming back for Falcon and Winter Soldier reviews, picking that back up in 2 weeks as well. We're looking forward to that also. So, Ryan, what are they saying in the chat?
Hey, lots going on in the chat here. Let me go to, I guess, say some comments that people had about the overall series. At May Kabir said, I didn't like Vision or Wanda before this show, but this made me like them just a bit more. So it's a win, I guess. Which I think
just a bit more, though.
A bit more. At Fiery Tribune, I loved it, but I wasn't a part of any discussions theorizing, so there wasn't anything to let down. At Ada Mary Curtis said, this ending felt very rushed to me, which is where the meat of the story was, and it kind of feels like time was wasted to just draw the story out and troll the comic book fans. So people are all over the place on the finale. Honestly, I think it's actually a pretty wide spectrum of how people are taking the finale and how it makes them feel about the overall show. Eric, I totally agree with what you said about the kind of the Ozymandias comparison. That's how I felt, where like that last episode was the one that was like, oh, that's the show for me, Do you think both of you think like the small episode, like the separate 9 episodes maybe like worked against it here at the end, like having it be another week in between these small 30-minute episodes, or do you think it, the show's format was fine?
I mean, I love the format overall, and I think not only because I am a strong believer in the weekly format and the kind of absorbing it all, but also this show was so tailor made for it. It was literally like a different thing each week. It, the double edged sword of that is yes, going into the finale versus if you watch it all in one afternoon, you're not going to have time to theorize 10 million things that might happen in the finale. You just watch it, so there's going to be some amount of that, like, well, I've built it up so much, and I waited a week, and I watched it at midnight, and then it didn't deliver all those do all those things I wanted to do. But I still think if you look at it in its totality, the weekly release and the way the episodes were formatted worked very well for this show, especially.
Yeah, I agree. I think it really did work for the show. I just think it's a matter of third act Marvelism. I think it, oddly enough, and we'll see with Falcon and Winter Soldier, that it's the moments before and right after the big third act battles that are usually the most resonant in Marvel movies for me personally. And those tend to feel a little more formulaic, and this felt formulaic. It felt like that on one layer there were boxes being ticked, but on the other layer I think they did nail it. It was just that last week didn't have to tick any of those boxes, so it was able to focus in on her as a character, going through the various stages of grief in the format of through the lens of television, and how television had been used in her life for her to escape her pain. So to me, it was like the perfect blend of everything that was working in the show, and it was focused in on character and emotion. So specifically, and this was had to be focused in more on plot.
Yeah.
And also they faked us out with Quicksilver.
Yeah. I will also say though, on that, the person who's, I know that the one person we read said it made them like Scarlet Witch and Vision a bit more, but I think for a lot of people it was a lot more. Like, I think a lot of people, like, from what I'm just seeing incidentally, like, this show made huge fans of those characters. And I think the one thing you kind of have to unequivocally give it is that, like, she comes out of this show as such a, like, beloved and important character in the MCU. And going in, I think some people are like, I like her, she's fine, I like Elizabeth Olsen. But now, like, Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, I think a lot of people are, like, very excited to see what happens with her next. I think that they've definitely positioned her at a time when we know they've lost, like, Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, and it's kind of a new era for them. It's like, oh, they've made people really invested in this character and what happens for her next. So I think that was very successful on that side of things.
And we've said it before, but we have to really praise her acting.
Yeah.
There was one little moment in this where it's like, I was watching the superhero family moment, and the levels of commitment among the actors and even the two kids, like that, I don't know the children's names, but one was a little less committed, and he looked a little more unsure, which is
their Incredibles moment.
Their Incredibles moment. And he looked a little more unsure, but she was this was one moment that she's been brilliant throughout, but it was like when she said, "You were born for this," that's a hard line to deliver. It's inherently cheesy. And she completely owned it, didn't make it seem cheesy. She, like, imbued it with all of this meaning. I just think she's an incredible actress, and I hope people really do. I always liked them as characters.
Yeah.
I wanted them to have their own movie.
No, me too. I was like bummed that Infinity War kind of was like, oh, I guess they're together now, because I was really liking the setup in Civil War, and I was like, oh, I wish we'd gotten a little more to get there, but I always liked them.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is what I asked for, which was an exploration of their relationship, but it went that's like in a very deep way. I do wonder, I know a couple of people were disappointed that their predictions weren't fulfilled. Are you seeing some of that in the chat as well, Ryan?
A little bit, yeah, of that. Everyone's kind of thinking about how it worked out. I think everyone in the chat is pretty understanding of, like, it's, obviously you can't grade the show just based off what I thought it was going to be. But yeah, people are talking about their various theories. People are also pointing out which I know, Eric, you were tweeting about, Darcy's disappearance.
Yeah,
at the end of the episode. I know you had like a quote unquote theory about what that was going on.
Yeah, I have a big guess on that, because especially watching it again, she literally is in one shot, says one line, and there's no other actors in the shot. I think this was a COVID thing. They had to come back and finish this show during COVID. So I bet it was a scheduling or a travel issue. I bet that, Kat Dennings probably would have been in 2 or 3 scenes. I don't think she'd have a huge role in the finale, but she probably would have been there with Jimmy and or Monica. And they probably just couldn't get her there, is just my guess. Because a lot of shows have had, we know Supernatural and other shows had that same problem when they came back to finish and they couldn't get all the actors back. it just felt with her, because she's literally not in a shot with another actor, and there's a Darcy double listed in the closing credits, not just a stunt double, a double. So I think they had to, and they even write her out like, oh, she left, she didn't want to deal with like the interrogation. So I think that was probably a scheduling thing, unfortunately.
Well, given that there were COVID challenges with this, it's even more impressive. And I will say, though we picked a big nit at the start of this conversation and a couple of nits throughout, I have loved this series. I really have. I'm very excited with the debut of the Marvel Disney series. I can't wait to see what they're going to do moving forward. And I'm also, I will admit, much more primed. I was ready for it, but I'm much more primed for the Doctor Strange movie.
Same here. Yeah. This was one of my favorite MCU things overall. Just I really loved the vibe of it, the feel of it. There was so many cool. I know you and I, Roth, we were like way in from the start. I know some people took to the third episode, like they thought the first two were a little too drawn out. But I was in what they were selling me from the start, and I think the commitment to it, both visually and the vibe of it, and then of course these actors. And just how much they sold it was so impressive. So yeah, it's like there's a lot of, there's plenty of movies, both superhero or not, where you're like, they didn't nail the ending. I'm not one of those people who feels like, oh, you better nail the ending 100% or it ruined it all for me. And they didn't. It's not like they did a terrible ending. It just this finale was not like, the whole episode wasn't like, this is my favorite episode. It was okay, and it had some good things and some things that, like you said, some things we weren't so psyched with. But overall, I look back on this show, I was like, this was so great. Like, I loved watching this show.
I love watching this show too. I would probably rewatch it, which is pretty rare for me. And I also think, invoking Spencer again, he and I are probably the very rare people that would have stretched out the reveals even longer and stretched out the integration of the MCU verse into this weird, strange world that they had created a little bit longer. So I'm unlike most people in that way, where I was like, give me more weird stuff.
I know. I was like, I'm like, oh, couldn't they have? I think like what you and I were saying, like, oh, couldn't they have done like a Roseanne or a Married with Children episode? Couldn't they have done this? Couldn't they have done that? Because I was just enjoying seeing them in the weird sitcom world.
I agree 100%, but I've loved this series. One of my favorite Marvel things. Looking forward to Falcon and Winter Soldier, which we will be reviewing coming up in a couple of weeks. We thank you guys so much for joining us. As always, it's been fun to do this on Fridays with you, Eric. And it's been fun to see. I can see all of you, as you know, and it's been fun to see you again. Love you guys. Be safe, be well, be good to each other. Wear a mask.